If the manuscript's touch is a ghost, its illustrations are a hallucination. We move now from the silent ink into a world where nature itself seems to have lost its mind. Strange, impossible flora that pulse with a life we cannot name, and roots that anchor into nothingness. Are these maps of a hidden world, or the fevered dream of a genius? As we enter this second chapter, prepare yourself, because once you see these shapes, you can never unsee the patterns they form. If you are listening to my stories right now, I wonder, where in the world are you joining me from? Perhaps in the quiet of the night, or amidst the rush of the day. Wherever you are welcome here. But before we step further into the shadows of this enigma, if you are a soul drawn to the whispers of the past and the mysteries the world forgot, you have found your sanctuary. Join our growing circle of seekers by subscribing to Dreamy Old Stories. Together, let us journey into the depths of history where the truth remains hidden, and every story carries a secret. Welcome back. This is Dreamy Old Stories, and today we uncover a tale that was never meant to be told. Across the parchment, the drawings of plants rise in careful lines, each stem extending upward with a quiet sense of intention. The leaves branch outward in shapes that suggest familiarity, yet resist being fully recognized. Some leaves are long and narrow, while others widen into rounded forms, their edges marked with small curves or fine points. The roots spread beneath them in delicate networks, reaching into empty space without touching anything solid. The illustrations are arranged with attention, each plant given its own place, yet none appear to belong to a known landscape or garden. Looking more closely, the forms begin to create a gentle sense of presence, as if they could be felt as much as seen. The imagined texture of the leaves carries a softness, though their shapes remain uncertain, never settling into something clearly defined. There is a quiet impression of growth within them, not active, but held within their structure, like something paused in mid-development. The air around the page feels slightly warmer when attention rests on these drawings, as though the forms themselves hold a trace of life that is sensed rather than confirmed. A subtle shift occurs as the eye moves from one plant to another, noticing how no two forms repeat in exactly the same way. Some stems twist slightly, introducing a gentle curve, while others rise more directly before branching outward. The arrangement of leaves changes from one illustration to the next, creating a quiet sequence of variation that unfolds across the page. These changes are not abrupt, but gradual, allowing each plant to emerge with its own character, shaped by small differences that become clearer over time. This quiet unfolding leads to a reflection that these plants are not meant to be identified, but to be observed as they are. The mind may search briefly for something familiar, but the search softens as it continues. There is a sense that these forms belong to a space that does not require naming, where recognition is not the goal. In this way, the drawings offer a different kind of presence, one that invites attention without asking for certainty, allowing the experience to remain open and undefined. On another page, the plants are drawn with fuller bodies, their stems thickening slightly as they rise, supporting clusters of leaves that gather in layered formations. Some leaves overlap gently, creating a sense of depth that gives the drawings a quiet dimensional quality. Small details appear within each leaf, faint lines that suggest veins, though they do not follow the pattern seen in familiar plants. The roots beneath these forms spread wider, branching into shapes that feel deliberate but remain difficult to trace. Each illustration occupies its own space, yet they seem to share a common approach, as if guided by the same unseen method. There's a soft sensation that develops when attention lingers on these layered forms, almost like observing something that holds a quiet weight. The imagined texture of the leaves feels thicker here, less delicate than before, as if they carry a subtle firmness within their structure. The arrangement creates a sense of closeness, where the elements of each plant gather together rather than extending outward. This produces a gentle feeling of enclosure, where the eye moves within the form rather than across open space, offering a different kind of visual experience. As the gaze shifts from one plant to the next, a small variation begins to appear in how these layers are arranged. Some leaves fold slightly inward, while others extend outward with a broader reach, creating a quiet contrast between contained and open forms. The stems respond to these differences, bending just enough to support the changing shapes above them. These adjustments are subtle, yet they guide the eye in new directions, allowing each illustration to unfold in its own way without repeating the same structure. This gradual variation brings a quiet awareness that these plants are not fixed representations, but evolving forms within the page. The mind begins to notice how each drawing offers a slightly different way of existing, without settling into a single pattern. There is no need to connect them to known species or categories. Instead, they invite a slower kind of attention, where the focus rests on how they appear rather than what they are, allowing their presence to remain open and gently unresolved. In another section, the plants appear more slender, their stems stretching higher with fewer branches, creating a lighter presence across the page. The leaves here are spaced farther apart, each one given room to extend outward without overlapping its neighbors. Some leaves take on unusual shapes, widening at the center before narrowing toward the tips, while others curve in ways that feel unfamiliar yet deliberate. The roots beneath these forms are finer, spreading in thin lines that seem to drift rather than anchor, giving the entire illustration a more open and elevated appearance. There is a different feeling that emerges while observing these taller, more spaced forms, one that carries a sense of quiet openness. The imagined touch of these leaves feels lighter, almost airy, as if they would move easily with the slightest disturbance. The space between the elements allows the eye to rest more freely, moving without the sense of enclosure found in the denser drawings. This creates a calm experience that feels less contained, offering a gentle expansion of attention across the page. As the gaze continues, small changes become noticeable in how these slender plants are structured. Some stems lean slightly to one side, introducing a gentle asymmetry, while others remain more upright but shift in their spacing. The leaves respond to these changes, adjusting their angles and positions in subtle ways. These variations are not abrupt, but they guide the eye into new patterns of movement, allowing the page to reveal different arrangements without repeating what has already been seen. This quiet unfolding leads to a reflection on how these plants occupy a space between familiarity and distance. They suggest forms that could exist, yet they remain just beyond clear recognition. The mind begins to settle into this uncertainty, no longer searching for a name, but accepting the forms as they appear. In this way, the drawings offer a presence that is not tied to identification, but to observation, where attention can rest without the need to resolve what is being seen. In a later page, the plants begin to gather closer to the center, arranged in ways that draw attention inward rather than outward. The stems curve gently toward one another, forming shapes that feel almost enclosed, as if they are responding to a shared space. Leaves cluster more tightly, overlapping in layers that create a soft density, without becoming crowded. Some forms appear to grow in pairs, their structures echoing one another without becoming identical. The roots beneath them twist in compact patterns, suggesting a quiet complexity that remains contained within the boundaries of the illustration. There is a subtle change in how these inward forms are experienced, creating a feeling that is more focused and intimate. The imagined texture feels closer, as though the surface of each leaf is within reach, even without touch. The arrangement draws the gaze toward the center of each plant, encouraging a slower, more concentrated way of looking. This sense of closeness does not feel heavy, but it carries a quiet depth, where attention settles rather than moves freely across open space. As the eye continues to explore these clustered forms, small shifts become visible in how the elements relate to one another. Some leaves fold slightly over others, creating gentle layers that change with perspective. The stems adjust their curves, sometimes leaning closer, sometimes opening just enough to create small gaps. These changes are gradual, allowing each plant to develop its own internal balance. The page reveals these differences slowly, offering new details as the gaze lingers and shifts across the surface. This observation leads to a reflection on how these plants seem to hold a sense of quiet connection within themselves. They do not reach outward toward anything beyond the page, but they form relationships within their own structure. The mind begins to notice that these forms exist in a contained space, where interaction happens internally rather than externally. In this way, the drawings offer a different kind of presence, one that invites attention to move inward, exploring the subtle connections that unfold within each form. On another page, the plants take on a more intricate appearance, their forms built from many smaller elements that gather into layered compositions. Leaves divide into finer segments, each one branching again into smaller shapes that create a delicate complexity across the surface. Some stems appear thicker at their base, then narrow as they rise, supporting these detailed structures above. The roots below mirror this pattern in a quieter way, spreading into fine networks that echo the branching above, though with less density. The overall arrangement feels carefully composed, yet not bound to any familiar botanical structure. There is a different kind of sensory impression that emerges when observing these more intricate forms, one that feels more attentive and focused. The imagined touch suggests a surface that is detailed rather than smooth, where each small division adds to a sense of texture that cannot be taken in all at once. The eye moves more slowly, pausing within the finer details before shifting to the next. This creates a quiet engagement that feels deeper, as if the attention is being drawn into the layers of the drawing rather than moving across it. As the gaze continues, small shifts become noticeable in how these intricate patterns are arranged. Some sections appear more densely filled, while others open slightly, allowing space to form between the finer elements. The stems adjust their direction subtly, guiding the placement of these details in ways that feel balanced without being symmetrical. These variations unfold gradually, allowing each plant to reveal its structure piece by piece, rather than presenting itself all at once. This unfolding detail leads to a reflection on how these plants exist beyond simple form, offering something that feels both structured and undefined. The mind does not attempt to organize every element, but instead allows the complexity to remain as it is. There is a quiet sense that these forms are complete within themselves, not requiring identification or comparison. In this way, the drawings invite a deeper kind of attention, where the focus rests not on understanding, but on experiencing the quiet intricacy they hold. Toward the final pages of these botanical drawings, the forms begin to appear slightly more spaced, with each plant standing apart in a clearer arrangement across the parchment. The stems rise with a measured simplicity, carrying fewer branches, while the leaves settle into shapes that feel broader and more open. Some illustrations include small details near the base, faint additions that suggest growth or extension, though they remain difficult to define. The roots spread in wider arcs, reaching outward with a gentle curve that creates a sense of quiet expansion across the lower part of the page. There is a softer sensation that develops when observing these more open forms, one that feels lighter and less concentrated than before. The imagined texture carries a sense of ease, as if the surface of each leaf would offer little resistance to touch. The spacing allows the eye to move freely between the elements, pausing where it chooses rather than being guided along a fixed path. This creates an experience that feels more relaxed, where attention can drift gently across the page without needing to focus on any single detail for long. As the gaze shifts from one illustration to another, small variations continue to appear, though they are quieter now. Some leaves curve slightly inward, while others extend outward with a subtle widening. The stems adjust their direction in gentle ways, introducing slight differences in posture that become noticeable over time. These changes are not pronounced, but they add a sense of quiet progression, allowing each plant to offer something new without departing from the overall simplicity of this section. This gradual softening leads to a reflection on how these plants seem to move toward a more open presence, where detail gives way to space. The mind begins to notice how the drawings no longer invite close inspection in the same way, but instead offer a broader, more relaxed way of seeing. There is no need to resolve their forms or connect them to known ideas. They remain where they are, inviting a calm awareness that accepts their quiet distance, allowing the experience to settle gently without conclusion. But the flora is only the stage. Now the actors appear, small, featureless figures trapped within circular cages of geometry. They do not look at us. They do not look at each other. They move with a haunting, rhythmic purpose, as if performing a ritual that hasn't been spoken aloud for 1,000 years. Within the circular diagrams, small human figures appear arranged in quiet positions, each one drawn with simple lines that suggest form without detail. Their bodies are proportioned in a consistent way, with rounded heads and narrow limbs, placed carefully within the boundaries of the shapes that surround them. Some stand upright, while others lean or extend their arms toward nearby lines and structures. The circles that contain them vary in size, sometimes enclosing a single figure, sometimes holding several, creating scenes that feel structured yet difficult to interpret. There's a soft sense of presence that emerges when observing these figures, as if they occupy their space with a quiet familiarity. Their gestures carry a calm quality, not hurried or dramatic, but measured in a way that feels steady. The imagined movement of their arms and posture suggests activity, though the purpose remains unclear. The surrounding diagrams create a sense of enclosure, shaping how these figures are experienced, as if they belong fully within these spaces and do not extend beyond them. As attention shifts from one diagram to another, small changes begin to appear in how the figures interact with their surroundings. Some reach toward the edges of the circles, while others remain closer to the center, creating different patterns of placement. A few figures seem to face one another, their positions forming quiet connections that suggest interaction without clear communication. These variations unfold gradually, allowing each diagram to present a slightly different arrangement of movement and relation. This observation leads to a reflection on how these figures exist within a contained world that does not open outward. They do not appear to look beyond their immediate surroundings, nor do they seem to acknowledge anything outside the diagrams. The mind begins to sense that their actions belong entirely within these circular spaces, forming a kind of internal rhythm. There is no clear narrative to follow, only a quiet awareness of presence and gesture that invites attention without offering explanation. In another set of diagrams, the figures appear arranged along the inner edges of the circles, forming a loose ring that follows the curve of the boundary. Their placement creates a sense of alignment, as if each one has been positioned with quiet intention to match the circular form. Some figures are spaced evenly, while others gather closer together, creating subtle shifts in density along the edge. The lines that define the circles are slightly thicker here, giving the boundary a more noticeable presence, as though it plays a role in shaping how the figures are arranged within it. There is a different sensory impression that comes from observing these edge-aligned figures, one that feels gently guided by the curve they follow. The eye moves in a slow arc, tracing the circular path as it passes from one figure to the next. This creates a soft rhythm that feels continuous, without a clear starting point or end. The figures seem to participate in this movement, their positions encouraging the gaze to travel along the same path they occupy, creating a quiet connection between form and perception. As attention continues along this circular flow, small variations begin to emerge in how each figure relates to the curve. Some lean slightly inward, while others turn outward just enough to shift their orientation. These subtle differences alter the feeling of the arrangement, introducing moments where the pattern feels more open or more enclosed. The spacing between figures adjusts as well, sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing, allowing the circle to feel dynamic rather than fixed in a single form. This gradual unfolding brings a reflection on how the figures seem to exist in relation to the boundaries that contain them. They do not move beyond the circle, yet their placement within it creates a sense of quiet motion. The mind begins to notice how their presence is shaped not only by their form, but by the space they inhabit. In this way, the diagrams offer a contained world where movement and structure are closely connected, inviting attention to follow their gentle patterns without seeking a defined purpose. In another diagram, the figures appear closer to the center, gathered in a loose cluster that shifts away from the outer edge. Their bodies are positioned in varied directions, some angled toward one another, others turned slightly aside, creating a sense of quiet arrangement that feels less guided by the boundary. The central space holds them together without enclosing them tightly, allowing small gaps to form between each figure. Around them, the circular lines remain present but less dominant, giving the impression that the focus has moved inward rather than outward. There is a different feeling that arises when observing this central grouping, one that feels more concentrated yet gently open. The eye no longer follows a curved path along the edge, but settles into the middle, moving between figures in shorter, more direct shifts. This creates a slower rhythm, where attention lingers briefly on each form before moving to the next. The figures seem closer here, not in distance alone, but in how they are experienced, offering a sense of quiet proximity that draws the gaze inward. As the gaze continues, small changes become noticeable in how the figures relate to one another within this space. Some appear slightly closer together, their gestures almost overlapping, while others stand apart, creating small pockets of separation. A few figures seem to align loosely, forming short lines that suggest connection without forming a fixed pattern. These variations unfold gradually, allowing the arrangement to feel fluid, as if it could shift gently without losing its balance. This observation leads to a reflection on how the center of the diagram creates a different kind of presence for the figures. They are no longer guided by the boundary, but by their relation to one another within the space. The mind begins to sense that their placement carries a quiet intention, though it remains undefined. There is no clear action to follow, only a subtle awareness of how they share this central area, forming a quiet arrangement that invites attention without revealing its purpose. In another diagram, the figures appear linked by fine lines that pass between them, forming connections that stretch across the circular space. These lines do not follow a strict pattern, yet they create a network that brings the figures into relation with one another. Some lines curve gently, while others move in straighter paths, intersecting at points that feel intentional without being precise. The figures stand along these connections, positioned where the lines meet or diverge, as if their placement is shaped by the paths that run through the diagram. There is a different sensory impression that comes from observing these connected forms, one that feels more guided and structured. The eye begins to follow the lines as much as the figures, moving along the paths that link one point to another. This creates a layered experience, where attention shifts between the shapes of the figures and the routes that join them. The lines introduce a quiet sense of direction, not as a clear path to follow, but as a suggestion of movement that flows through the entire arrangement. As attention settles into this network, small variations become visible in how the lines interact with the figures. Some connections appear more direct, linking figures in shorter distances, while others stretch across wider spaces, creating longer paths that cross the diagram. The figures respond to these differences in subtle ways, their positions aligning with the lines that pass through them. These shifts are gradual, allowing the structure to reveal itself slowly, without forming a rigid or predictable system. This unfolding leads to a reflection on how the figures and lines create a shared presence within the diagram. They do not stand alone, but exist within a network that shapes how they are seen. The mind begins to notice that the meaning of their placement may lie not in the individual forms, but in the connections between them. Yet this meaning does not become clear or defined. It remains quiet, held within the pattern itself, inviting observation without offering resolution. In another diagram, the figures appear engaged in repeated gestures, their arms raised or extended in ways that echo one another across the circle. These movements are not identical, yet they share a similar direction, creating a sense of quiet repetition within the arrangement. Some figures bend slightly at the waist, while others remain upright, their postures forming a gentle variation around a shared action. The circular boundary holds these gestures together, allowing them to form a pattern that feels continuous, though not fixed into a single uniform motion. There is a distinct sensation that comes from observing these repeated gestures, one that feels rhythmic in a soft and measured way. The eye moves from one figure to the next, noticing how each posture relates to the others, creating a sequence that unfolds gradually. This repetition does not feel mechanical, but steady, as if it follows an internal pace that does not need to be explained. The figures seem to participate in this quiet rhythm, their positions guiding attention in a way that feels calm and unforced. As the gaze continues, Small differences begin to emerge within this repeated action. Some figures lift their arms higher, while others hold them at a lower angle, introducing a gentle variation within the shared gesture. The spacing between figures shifts slightly, allowing certain areas to feel more open while others become more closely arranged. These changes are subtle, yet they shape how the pattern is perceived, preventing it from becoming uniform while maintaining its quiet continuity. This gradual variation leads to a reflection on how repetition within the diagram does not create sameness, but a layered sense of presence. The figures do not perform a single action in exact form, but move within a range of gestures that feel connected. The mind begins to notice that this repetition carries a quiet depth, where meaning is suggested through pattern rather than defined through clarity. In this way, the diagram offers an experience that unfolds through rhythm, inviting attention to follow its gentle sequence without seeking a final interpretation. In the final diagrams of this sequence, the figures appear more dispersed, with greater distance between each form, allowing the circular space to become more visible around them. The lines that once connected or guided them are lighter here, sometimes fading into the background or breaking into shorter segments. Each figure stands with a quieter presence, their gestures less pronounced, their positions more isolated within the wider space. The circles themselves seem larger in proportion, creating an environment where the figures no longer gather closely, but occupy the space with a gentler separation. There is a different sensation that arises from this openness, one that feels more expansive and less directed. The eye no longer follows a clear path between figures, but moves more freely, pausing in the spaces that lie between them. These empty areas become part of the experience, offering a sense of calm that balances the presence of the figures. The arrangement feels less structured, allowing attention to drift without being guided by strong patterns or connections, creating a softer rhythm across the page. As the gaze continues, a subtle change becomes noticeable in how the figures relate to the space around them. Some appear slightly turned away from one another, while others face inward but remain distant, suggesting a quiet shift in how they occupy the diagram. The absence of strong connections or repeated gestures allows these differences to become more visible. Each figure begins to feel more independent, not separated completely, but less bound to a shared structure than before. This gentle shift leads to a reflection on how the figures now exist within a broader sense of space rather than within tight arrangements. The mind begins to notice how the diagrams have moved from connection toward openness, allowing the figures to stand in quieter relation to one another. There is no clear conclusion to their placement, only a gradual easing into a more spacious presence. In this way, the diagrams offer a final impression that feels less about structure and more about quiet separation, where attention can rest without needing to follow a defined path. Who are these people, and what defines the borders of their world? To find the answer, we must strip away the life and the limbs and look at the cold, hard logic beneath. The geometry, circles, stars, and overlapping paths that suggest a mathematical certainty to a problem we haven't yet understood. Across the open pages, geometric forms spread outward in carefully arranged patterns, where circles overlap with other circles, and lines extend between them in quiet connections. Some designs expand into star-like shapes, their points reaching outward with measured spacing, while others remain layered, forming rings within rings that draw the eye inward. The ink traces each form with steady precision, creating boundaries that feel deliberate without appearing rigid. These structures do not crowd the page, but occupy it with a balanced presence, allowing each shape to stand clearly within the larger arrangement. There is a particular sensation that comes from observing these forms, one that feels guided yet without clear direction. The eyes begin to follow the curves and lines, moving from one point to another, tracing paths that seem meaningful but do not lead to a defined conclusion. The circular shapes create a soft sense of enclosure, while the star-like extensions offer moments of outward movement. This combination produces a quiet rhythm, where attention shifts between expansion and return, creating an experience that feels complete without needing explanation. As the gaze lingers, small shifts in the structure begin to appear, revealing variations that were not immediately visible. Some circles are slightly offset from one another, creating gentle asymmetry within the design, while certain lines connect in ways that suggest alternative paths across the page. The layering of shapes introduces depth, allowing the eye to move between foreground and background without a fixed order. These changes unfold gradually, offering new ways of seeing the same arrangement as attention continues to move across it. This unfolding presence leads to a quiet reflection on how these geometric forms hold a sense of order that cannot be easily followed. The mind may begin to search for patterns or systems, but the search softens as the shapes continue to present themselves without clear direction. There is a sense that the geometry exists on its own terms, complete within its structure. In this way, the designs invite observation without interpretation, allowing the experience to remain open and gently unresolved. In another section, the geometry spreads into wider compositions where several circles overlap in loose formations, creating shared spaces where their boundaries meet. These intersections form new shapes within the larger design, areas that are neither fully part of one circle nor the other. Thin lines pass through these overlaps, connecting distant points with quiet intention. Some segments appear slightly thicker, giving certain paths more presence, while others remain faint, almost blending into the parchment. The overall arrangement feels extended, as if the design could continue beyond the edges of the page. There is a gentle sensation that arises when following these overlapping forms, one that feels layered and spacious at the same time. The eye moves through the intersection slowly, pausing where shapes combine, then continuing along the lines that extend outward. This creates a soft rhythm of entry and departure, where attention moves into a space, lingers briefly, then shifts toward another. The experience does not feel confined, even within the circular structures, but offers a quiet sense of openness that allows the gaze to wander without pressure. As attention deepens, subtle variations begin to reveal themselves within these overlaps. Some intersections appear more defined, their boundaries clearer, while others seem softer, where the lines merge more gently. The connections between shapes adjust slightly, with certain paths curving more than others, introducing a quiet sense of movement within the structure. These changes are not immediate, but become noticeable through continued observation, allowing the geometry to unfold in layers rather than presenting itself all at once. This unfolding leads to a reflection on how the geometry creates spaces that are shared rather than separate. The mind begins to sense that these forms are not isolated units, but part of a broader arrangement where boundaries meet and blend. There is no clear system that explains these connections, yet they feel purposeful in their placement. In this way, the geometry offers an experience of relation without definition, inviting attention to move through its spaces without needing to resolve their meaning. further along. The designs gather into star-like formations where multiple lines radiate outward from a central point. Each ray extends with measured spacing, creating a balanced spread that feels intentional yet not strictly calculated. Between these lines, smaller shapes appear, filling the spaces with delicate forms that echo the larger structure. Some stars are enclosed within circles, while others stand more openly on the page, their points reaching into the surrounding space. The arrangement gives a sense of expansion, where the geometry moves outward from a quiet center. There is a different sensation that comes from observing these radiating forms, one that feels gently outward moving. The eyes begin at the center, then travel along the lines toward the edges, following each path with a calm and steady motion. This creates a soft rhythm of extension, where attention moves away from the middle before returning again. The experience feels balanced, offering both direction and freedom, allowing the gaze to follow any of the radiating paths without needing to choose a single one. As the gaze continues, small variations begin to appear within these star-like structures. Some rays extend slightly farther than others, while certain lines curve just enough to alter their direction. The smaller shapes between the rays shift in size and placement, creating subtle differences from one formation to another. These changes are quiet but noticeable, allowing each design to carry its own character while remaining connected to the overall pattern. The geometry reveals itself gradually, offering new details as attention moves across the page. This unfolding leads to a reflection on how these radiating forms suggest movement without requiring it to be followed. The mind may begin to trace the lines outward, yet there is no need to complete the path. The shapes hold their presence fully, whether the gaze follows them or not. In this way, the geometry becomes less about direction and more about possibility, offering a space where attention can move freely without needing to arrive anywhere or reach a conclusion. On another page, the geometry gathers into layered bands that circle inward toward a quiet center, each ring carrying its own pattern of lines and small shapes. These bands are not perfectly even, yet they follow a steady progression, creating a sense of depth that draws the eye from the outer edge toward the middle. Within each ring, the markings shift slightly, forming repeating motifs that echo across the layers without becoming identical. The center often holds a small shape or open space, giving the entire structure a focal point that anchors the surrounding forms. There is a distinct sensation that emerges when observing these layered circles, one that feels gently inward moving. The eye follows the rings as they narrow, passing through each layer with a quiet sense of progression. This creates a soft rhythm of approach, where attention moves closer to the center without any urgency. The repetition within the bands offers a calming pattern, while the slight differences between them keep the experience from becoming fixed, allowing the gaze to remain engaged as it moves inward. As the gaze settles into these layers, small variations begin to appear in how each band is formed. Some rings carry tighter patterns, with shapes placed more closely together, while others open slightly, creating wider spaces between their markings. The lines that define the bands shift in thickness, introducing gentle contrasts that change how each layer is perceived. These differences unfold gradually, revealing a structure that feels both connected and varied, offering new details as attention continues to move across it. This quiet unfolding leads to a reflection on how these layered forms create a sense of depth that is not measured by distance, but by arrangement. The mind begins to notice that the movement toward the center is not a journey with an end, but a way of experiencing the structure itself. There is no final meaning waiting at the middle, only a continuation of form within form. In this way, the geometry invites attention to move inward without expectation, allowing the experience to remain open and gently contained. Across another spread, the geometry loosens into patterns that feel less enclosed, where lines extend outward without forming complete circles. These lines intersect at angles that create open frameworks, suggesting shapes that are only partially defined. Small star-like figures appear between these lines, placed at points where connections meet, giving the structure a quiet sense of balance. The spacing between elements becomes wider here, allowing the parchment to show more clearly, and creating an arrangement that feels lighter, as if the design is expanding beyond its earlier boundaries. There is a different sensory impression that comes from observing these open frameworks, one that feels more spacious and less directed. The eye moves across the page without being drawn into a central point, instead following lines that branch outward in multiple directions. This creates a gentle sense of wandering, where attention is not guided along a fixed path, but allowed to move freely between the intersections. The openness of the design introduces a softer rhythm, where the gaze can pause in the spaces as much as it follows the lines. As attention continues, small changes become visible in how these lines connect and separate. Some intersections are more defined, where lines meet with clear angles, while others appear more fluid, with curves that soften the structure. The small star-like shapes vary in size and placement, sometimes gathering closer together, sometimes standing apart. These variations unfold gradually, giving the geometry a sense of quiet movement that does not rely on repetition, but on subtle shifts in arrangement. This unfolding leads to a reflection on how these open forms suggest a kind of order that is not confined within boundaries. The mind begins to notice that the geometry does not need to close itself into complete shapes to feel whole. Instead, it offers a presence that extends outward, inviting attention to move through it without needing to define its limits. In this way, the design becomes less about containment and more about expansion, allowing the experience to remain open and gently unstructured. In the final pages of these geometric drawings, the structures begin to appear quieter in their arrangement, with fewer overlapping elements and more space surrounding each form. Circles return, but they are simpler now, drawn with fewer internal divisions, allowing their outlines to stand with greater clarity. Some shapes sit alone on the page, while others are placed at a distance from one another, creating a sense of separation that was less present before. The lines are lighter in certain areas, as if the hand that formed them moved with a softer touch, leaving behind marks that feel more open and less densely layered. There is a gentle sensation that comes with observing these simpler forms, one that feels less guided and more spacious. The eye moves slowly between the shapes, not following a structured path, but resting briefly on each one before drifting to the next. The absence of dense patterns allows the surrounding parchment to take part in the experience, creating a balance between form and space. This openness introduces a quiet ease, where attention is not directed by strong connections, but allowed to settle wherever it naturally comes to rest. As the gaze continues, subtle differences begin to appear in how these forms are placed across the page. Some circles are positioned closer together, while others stand apart, creating small variations in distance that shape how the arrangement is perceived. The lines shift slightly in thickness, with certain outlines appearing more defined, while others soften at their edges. These changes are quiet but noticeable, offering a gentle progression that unfolds without drawing attention to itself. This gradual softening leads to a reflection on how the geometry seems to move toward a quieter expression, where complexity gives way to simplicity. The mind begins to notice that the absence of dense structure does not reduce the presence of the forms, but changes how they are experienced. There is no need to follow patterns or seek connections. Instead, the shapes offer themselves as they are, allowing attention to rest within their quiet clarity, without expectation or resolution. We have navigated the impossible plants, the silent figures, and the precision of the stars. But as the geometry begins to simplify, a terrifying thought emerges. The patterns aren't getting easier to read. They are getting more intimate. We are no longer just looking at a book. The book is starting to dictate how we think. Tomorrow, in the final act, the layers fall away entirely to reveal the core of the mystery. The question is, are you ready for what happens when the manuscript finally breaks its silence?